Okay, cool.
Got it.
Okay, so let's start. Um, all right. So we're back to Cracks and Pomo, and today we have Bodiless Organs from IG. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a great honor. Big fan.
As am I, because I have to, it's hard to pin down what your posts are about. I think it's something that you just have to see to understand, but it definitely caught my attention. And you described it as obnoxious and what did you say?
I used the word obstinate.
Obstinate. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's no, you definitely have to see it to get it, but I can't stop scrolling through. So we're gonna start today, since we're both safe to say Palliaites, I guess. Pallia's take on a couple of pop stars, starting with Madonna, who was she got a lot of attention for writing a New York Times piece. When was this? This was
Yeah.
96, I think. No, it was
I thought it
1990.
was before that. Yeah, right there.
December 1990. So she wrote this
December 14th.
December 14th. So
Yeah.
she wrote this piece about Madonna. The title is Madonna Finally a Real Feminist. So mm, basically, saying that she is like the poster child of sex positive feminism. What do we make of this? Madonna as a real feminist.
It
What do you
seems so far. It seems so far removed now. This is like what, decades later, and new kind of standards have emerged. I guess the whole sexual iconography thing that Madonna did back then is not as scandalous as it is right now, because I'm pretty sure Polly's whole thing was the transgressive nature of Madonna's, I guess, performance of Catholicism. But I guess back then it made sense. But today it doesn't really ring. I mean, even Polly said herself that Madonna kind of has dried up over the last 20 something years, caught up in wealth of fame. But yeah,
And their relationship is weird because Palia starts out in 1990 singing her praises, saying how amazing, Madonna is this example for feminists. And then I guess someone tried to set them up so that they could do an interview or something, and Madonna just kept turning her down, which
I
is
wonder why. That's so weird, right?
kind of stupid. It's funny because I remember reading somewhere that David Bowie read, because she also wrote a lot about David Bowie, and
Yeah.
he tried contacting Palia, and she thought it was a joke. And he tried multiple times and then just kept turning her down. And then eventually she realized years later that it was him, and she like totally regretted it. But Madonna, she turned it down every time. And then so then what was this? When she did the Billboard Awards, I think she said that like she called Palia out for what did she say? She's like one of her detractors or something.
Yeah, one of the people, I think Polly said that uh, she set women back or something that like was something in that direction or not. But it was, I know she went on like was it a rant about misogyny and sexism in the music industry? And then
Yeah.
she called Polly out by saying that uh, Madonna set women back through her objectification or whatnot. I'm pretty sure I'm getting that. I'm convoluting the message, but that's what I recall.
Which Palia never said. Like I don't know where
Yeah,
she heard this. But
it's just
then
probably through the grapevine. You know these things.
I mean
These
like
things
you could
normally
just
happen.
read the article though. Like you could read what she said herself, but then again no one reads anymore. So I
Have you
don't
been
know.
able to find a? Have you been able to find a a, a print of the article? Because I've been thinking about that. Same with the Gaga article. I haven't been able to find any prints so far, so it's a bit up in the air.
Yeah, but then after she said that at the speech, Palia starts like criticizing her for, trying to gain pity and like turning women into victims rather than, because like that's her whole thing with sex positive feminism, that you're not supposed to complain about the patriarchy bringing down, like you're supposed to claim your power as a woman because you are inherently more powerful as a woman.
Isn't that what I guess she is trying to do, I guess, by saying that women past a certain age can look sexy, and uh that's something at least that I think that Polly was uh really being really weird about, because it's not classy to an extent like some of Polly's other objects of adoration, I think. I'm not really sure who else it was, but it was a uh I can't it evades me right now. But yeah, what do you think about that?
Um, I don't know. I mean, with the aging thing, I just think it's sad to see these women who were once seen as like these sex icons trying to stay relevant, trying to stay sexy, especially her. 'Cause it's like you're old now. Like, what is she, like 50, 60 something? And I'm like,
Yeah, I
what
think
are you?
early mid 60s.
Like, first of all, she doesn't even look that good. Like, some old ladies do look really good. But anyway, like, there is a sense that you have to submit to the natural process of aging, And I'm like, but who also the music is not even that exciting. Like the only people who listen to it are like, I don't know, these like I think about when I'm in Greenwich Village and I see all these like old men who used to go to these raves in the 80s and 90s and were obsessed with Madonna and who are now old and irrelevant, and like they're the only people who I know who are obsessed with her. So I don't know. I just think at a certain point you give it up, you let your legacy speak for you. It's like the same thing with Mariah Carey. Her voice is shot. She
Yeah.
looks ridiculous with all these fake breast implants. At a certain point, you have to like know when to hang it up. And again, let your legacy speak for you. Why do you keep trying?
Doesn't that just speak to the whole, I guess, the kind of addictive nature of fame, or more so relevance to that extent? But even if they did not, even if they did not try all this to remain relevant, I think their mystique still persists. I mean, you say Madonna, and everyone knows who you're talking about, and Mariah Carey, and everyone knows who you're talking about. So I think, and whatever they seek to do, whatever they have sought to do, is scrutinized, I guess.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, when you look at the original New York Times article, so she starts out talking about the Justify My Love video, which so she's saying that MTV was right to ban it because it's extremely pornographic, it's decadent, it's
Mm,
fabulous.
mm.
Um, and that's not a bad thing though. She's saying, yeah, like it's not because it's an evil, bad video. Like, yeah, it's totally pornographic and at some points even blasphemous, but it's a work of art, you know. She's appreciating that it is pushing these boundaries. It is going against these kind of this sense of respectability. I don't know.
That's the article where she calls the video avant-garde, right?
Yeah, because I mean, I went
The
back and watched it last night. I mean, I probably saw it years ago, but yeah, like it's really over the top, but it's really well done. It has a lot of depth and the way it's shot, just in terms of the videography, like it's beautiful. You know.
do you agree with what Polly said about uh how it's sort of like it reveals some kind of, I guess, moral puritan, like some kind of moral purity, and something about how suffocating American feminism was back then, or still is right now. Do you agree with that to an extent? Because I'm a bit on the fence about that.
I mean, if it depends on how do we understand womanhood, first of all, femininity, and also what does it mean to be liberated. I think,
Oh,
yeah, like if we're gonna take this basically this pagan approach to sexuality, to gender, yeah, like it's a pagan ode to the power of female sexuality, that the woman does hold power over a man, and that there's something spiritual about it. There's something, I mean, I would just say even demonic about it, but it's inherently fascinating, no matter how you no matter how you spin it. Um, Now, is it like actually liberating women? I don't know. That's, that's up for debate. But I think the fact that, yeah, like she is taking this very pagan approach to sexuality, it does call into question this sense of Puritan respectability, which is vapid and very just aesthetically has no value, you know.
She says it has like kind of a sadomasochistic feel to it,
It
I
does.
think. Yeah.
Because sex is inherent. I mean, she's taking this, I guess, from Freud's line of thought that sex is wrapped up in both generating life and ending life. Like there's something inherently beautiful, but also violent and dangerous about it. And I think she's saying it's not like sex is not either this bad thing that we have to hide. It's also not this pretty picture perfect thing, flowers and rainbows. Like it's dangerous, and that's when she
That
like
rem-
talks about, yeah, go ahead.
that reminds me of I think in one of the essays in Sex, Art, and American Culture, she's kind of deriding this idea of like, how can I say it properly? Presbyterian sex, or like
Mhm.
what you were talking about earlier about this whole pure view of, I guess, humanity and sexuality, about it being, how can I say, censored to be this kind of tender thing, when in reality it's has a sadomasochistic element, and sadomasochism is it's hierarchical, and
Yeah.
it does not permit any kind of permissiveness to it.
Yeah, and I mean, if we're gonna broach it from a religious perspective, Palia has, I think it was in Sex, Art, and American Culture. She has that piece on the Presbyterian Church and their changing attitude towards sexual morality. And you see that the mainline Protestant churches, they're coming from this Puritan background that basically removes the metaphysical value of the physical material world. So then we're left with these very moralistic black and white rules. It's like either this is good or bad. If you do the bad thing, you're going to hell. If you do the good thing, you're going straight to heaven. When really it's more complicated than that. And so that's why we see that it's either like it's totally bad or like no, everything's fine. It's all flowers and rainbow. Love is love. Whereas now she's introducing this, I guess, this more sacramental kind of sensibility. Because on one hand, again, there's the pagan vision of sex that is about this, I don't know, this valorization of the body. The body has this transcendent energy. And you also see her playing with the Catholic imagery, which I guess would be the flip side of the pagan approach, saying that, well, okay, yeah, I mean, that danger does lead to sin, which leads to ultimately nothingness. But the
Right.
body also is a symbol of the divine. And then when you channel it in I don't know, when you channel that sexual desire in a particular way, in conformity with nature, it does bring us closer to this divine kind of origin. But whether we take that more pagan approach, the Catholic sacramental approach, we recognize that the body is not neutral. It's not just whatever love is love. There's more than that. And you see
It's
that,
like it
yeah.
it exists in like a continuum, is what I'm gathering from what you're saying.
Yeah, and you see that again, like you can condemn it as blasphemous or even, again, like I said, demonic, but no matter which way you spin it, you see that it's making a very real statement. Even I think there's the part when the guy, one of the like more cisgender looking guys, I guess we can say, he's wearing a black crucifix. So yeah, like controversial, scandalous, but it's saying something about, okay, you're wearing the dead body of Christ around your neck while you're
Mm.
performing the sexual act. it's sending a very powerful message about what's transpiring in this moment.
I've never been able to, I guess, see that in Madonna's music more so because I'm not exactly looking into seeing it as such, you know. But I've always been impressed by the. I'm not exactly sure if this is correct, but like militant nature of it. You know, it's very authoritarian. It seems. I mean, even in her dress, the leather and the boots. You know, it just always it speaks to something that I know Paulia wrote about it being in the again bringing this back to sadomasochism, but about how it is not always like free love hippie bullshit, you know.
Mhm.
And then one of the solutions she does bring up, which I found really interesting, is about confronting this kind of anxiety, these anxieties, cultural anxieties about sexism. It kind of like blurring the distinctions between uh, hetero and homosexuality, you know, so that it's just plain undifferentiated desire or erotic desire in flux at any given time, liable to change throughout the hours of the day, which is strangely, it's very in keeping with the French post-structural tradition that she so despises, you know. But yeah, just everything being a dynamic continuum. I think that's where I'm inclined to agree with her.
The only thing I would say though is that so like you have these so yeah, you have this kind of fluctuating sexual desire in the video where she's with a very masculine looking guy with someone who's definitely a woman, and then you have these androgynous people. But I think what she's trying to say is that this polarity between the genders is real. And yes, there are people who who don't fit. There are people who blur the lines.
Mm,
But I think the difference with the post-structuralist take would be that like the people who lie outside the norm, in at least in the context of this video, confirm that yes, there is this polarity. There's a duality between the male and female.
yeah.
Rather than like if we take Judith Butler, who's saying, well, no, it's all something we've constructed. I think Madonna probably wouldn't say this out loud today, but at least Palia would say, like, yes, this is nature, but we have this inclination to defy nature, to rebel against it. Thus, the androgyny, the fluctuating heterosexual, homoerotic kind of encounters. So I don't know. I think that's what a lot of people get confused with Palia because she like believes in nature. She believes that certain things are fixed, but also
Yeah.
that we have the right to rebel, to play with it. I don't know. It's a level of nuance that I think a lot of people are not capable of wrapping their heads around anymore.
I guess the idea that there are feminine and masculine impulses kind of reeks of some kind of castrating, not exactly castrating, conservatism that people are just not um ready to hear about these days or don't want to hear about, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And she mentions the decadent writers like Baudelaire and Oscar Wilde. And I definitely think there is I mean, I wonder how much Madonna actually read these people. I mean, everybody's read a little bit of Wilde, but I definitely do see some parallels there. And you see the tension within those two figures between, again, like this kind of pagan, demonic aesthetic versus a very sacramental Catholic one. You know, Wilde was torn back and forth his entire life, Baudelaire as
Yeah.
well, you know. But it speaks again to the fact that human nature is not neutral. It's not this
Black
enlightened.
and white, like you
Yeah.
said.
It's not the Rousseau, like she talks about this in Sexual Persona in the beginning. Like Rousseau wants to construct this very picture perfect ideal of human nature that
Yeah.
everything's fine, it's all good, when really we're not. Like part of nature is that we are inclined to violence, to destruction. And I think the
And
authors like them, they got that.
some would say that's a very like I guess a fatalist, like kind of like in the tradition of Hobbes, I guess, it seems man is inherently evil, you know. But it's actually funny that you bring up the decadent writers because if we consider the, I guess, the cultural context in which Madonna came up, New York in the '80s, and the kind of people she was around the whole time, wouldn't that have made it would make sense that she would, I guess, continue in the traditions? Because when I think about New York in the late '70s, early '80s, it's very much Mapplethorpe, Patti Smith, Keith Haring,
Mhm.
Basquiat, those types of people coming up, and it did highlight these, at least what I know about art, in terms of the kind of art that was being shown in New York galleries, and the kind of music that was coming up. That there was punk as well. These very real tensions between, I guess, high art and low art, and these bourgeois, essentially, I hate saying that, these bourgeois ideals towards purity and sanctity, and consecrated spaces for self-reflection, and then this rough kind of on the street aesthetic. And then I know, because Madonna and Basquiat did get together for a time. So I'm just kind of thinking about how her relationship with artists has always been those artists that seek to transgress social norms and social boundaries, and it definitely came through in the music, and it's very interesting to consider these things.
Yeah, and I do because didn't she grew up in Detroit before going to New York. So I wonder like when was her artistic aesthetic sensibility formed? Because from what I understand of her upbringing in Detroit, like it was not, it was very tame. It was fairly bourgeois. So I guess it
Yeah.
wasn't until she came into the city that I don't know, because there's something about the urban environment that's conducive to recognizing that tension that's inherent to human nature. Like it's there's more space for it. Whereas I don't know, at least my experience, because I grew up in suburbia before going to New York for college, but suburbia is designed to hide that tension, to make it to,
Mm.
really push this liberal enlightenment view of human nature. And I think that's why so many people in suburbia like lose their minds because there's no space to really articulate what you know to be true. Whereas the city, like it's right there in front of you. You can engage with that tension very physically.
Yeah, it's literally next door.
It's
I
everywhere.
mean, I guess that's perhaps why a lot of suburban neighborhoods all always look the same. There's this kind of implicit idea of conformity,
Yeah.
and it becomes, I guess, internalized. And it's always interesting if you think about, like, cultural, I guess, uh cultural artifacts, or how they're, like, if I think about the case of rap in particular, how still to this day it's being consumed by white suburban kids who I guess have never had to face these tensions before, and then they hear the same thing with punk, actually, with all kinds of radical music forms. It's always,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm. I was gonna say like that's my experience growing up in suburbia because I always had this intuition that there was more than what they were telling me. Like there was this tension. And every time I talked to it, people were like, oh, don't worry about those things. Everything's going to be fine. Just be yourself. And I guess I was drawn to particularly to forms of music that I felt embodied that tension. And even though I didn't know why I was drawn to it, like I became very attached to those forms of music because even though yeah it's far into my experience socially, I guess on an existential or ontological level that music was expressing what I knew to be true, and it wasn't until I was in an urban context that I think everything came together because that's where that music is born, like that's
Yeah,
born out of that tension.
it's funny that you can't exactly say the same thing for, I guess, stuff like literature and art, because a lot of the times it comes from the most stuffy spaces.
Yeah, and it says something about the difference between literature and music as art forms.
Well, what do you think about that?
Because music, it's much more, it's embodying this drama in a very concrete way. Because you're not just talking about it, you're not just telling someone about it. Like the composition of the song, production, instrumentation, like it's giving flesh to it almost. And yeah, like you can tell a story with the lyrics, but I think it's just the nature of music itself that like captures a certain sense of mystery that literature itself it does, but it's not as concrete, it's not as tangible, I guess.
Do
And
you
that's
think
why
that? Do you think that
yeah.
like do you think it'd be possible for Madonna to recapture that same kind of animalistic um I guess impulse that she had when she first came out, or is it just, or is that something that is only possible in youth?
No, I think that's only in youth because youth is when you're more free to defy nature. Like you're more free to push these boundaries to be decadent. Whereas when you're older, nature now is dominating you. Like you can't play games with it anymore. You're confronted with mortality. The fact that all the things you've done, all the tricks you've played, they will end at a certain point. And to keep pushing the envelope, like that's the thing that's beautiful about people like Wilde and Baudelaire. Like Wilde was wild, like he went crazy, pushed all the boundaries, but then he found out, oh, there are consequences. Nature gets you
Yeah,
back, or God gets you back. And he submitted. He said, well, I guess the only choice now is to recognize that, okay, there's a higher order and that I won't really be fulfilled in my old age and ultimately in my death if I don't submit to that. Baudelaire did it a little earlier, um, had a different trajectory, but I think at a certain point, like someone like Madonna should look into the light and realize, okay, I'm old, I've played the game. It's a dead end. Like you hit a wall. Where is this gonna decadence is not gonna take you any further now.
you could. I mean, if you did do that, it would take you straight, like faster to your grave where you're already headed. That's
Yeah,
very depressing. I think nature is kind of something inescapable, as you suggested.
yeah. And that then the question though, again, like if we're going to ascribe to a pagan narrative about nature, I think at a certain point it will become nihilistic because nature doesn't love you. Whereas if we are going to
No.
go to a more monotheistic narrative, it's like, yeah, nature's crazy, but there's someone who creates that, and that creator
Yeah.
is benevolent and ultimately has our best interest in mind. So, like, and I think again, that's what Wilde realized at a certain point that there was a mercy behind all of these dark things happening in his life.
And that
But
he has to try, I guess it's a very religious take, I guess, but try to redeem yourself before your time.
yeah, or at least on your deathbed. I mean, there's always that,
Yeah.
you know.
On your deathbed.
But what about Gaga? Let's go into Gaga. Because Palia really tore her to shreds.
Right?
Is that merited? Is
Christ.
that fair?
No, I don't think so. It seems like kind of like a boomer arguing at the clouds argument that she makes. Gaga isn't sexy. Like that was what I gathered from the entire, I guess, scandal about it.
Someone who wrote a critique of Palia's critique was like, Gaga's not trying to be sexy, and being sexy is not the only standard for being a good artist. I was like, yeah,
Mm.
she's not trying to be sexy. And that's not the only standard. But she
Well, if
isn't
you think
sexy.
about it, isn't the I think she was trying to view Gaga through the same lens through which she viewed Madonna back in the 90s, the whole
Yes.
this sexual iconography essentially.
I think Gaga is like the epitome of millennial culture because there's something, yeah. So I think the fact that she's not sexy, that so much of her persona is based not on being like a sex goddess, being,
Yeah.
like it's really I think a lot of it is this identity politics stuff. It's like I'm misunderstood, I'm an outcast, people don't get me, Be who you are, be a freak, be a monster, love yourself and you'll be set. Like it's so like millennial that
Self-care.
yeah, and like that's inherently unsexy because sex is about taking
Mm.
risks. It's recognizing that nature transcends you. It's not just about you expressing yourself. But that being said, like, okay, so she stands for this kind of vapid bourgeois neoliberal kind of ideal or narrative. Is she artistic? Yeah, I think she is. Not the same kind of artist as Madonna, but I think there's a true artistic
No,
genius behind her. Is there?
she I'm not sure, but in this thing, I think some of the, because I know the article isn't circulating as much anymore, but she does say some poignant things about the, I hate to say this, but the culture,
Mhm.
about how we're all plugged into our phones, and Gaga is pretty much emblematic of how plastic and devoid of emotion we all are. That's the argument that
Yes,
Polya makes.
but that's okay. So, like, I do think there's something again on an ontological level more powerful about Madonna. Like, she speaks to this worldview that's inherently more rich than the one that most millennials inhabit. But Lady Gaga's the fact that she embodies it so intensely, like that offers a very powerful critique of that culture. Like it's like she's holding up a mirror, like a magnified mirror, forcing us to look at the fact that there's something very ugly, kind of empty about all of this.
Mm.
Um, there's something also like her critique is very campy, and that's what I think gives her like that's why I say she has artistic genius because um yeah, so like Born This Way, it's this very typical, again, bourgeois neoliberal narrative about be yourself. Sex is not
To love
about playing.
yourself.
Yeah, it's like she's saying basically homosexuality is not about defying nature, it's about expressing yourself. But the way she does it, it is decadent, it is campy, and it makes you like think like, yeah, born this way, love yourself and you'll be set. Like, what is this? Like,
Mm.
it is kind of what does she say? Palia says something about it's like it's so clinical, strangely antiseptic, stripped of genuine eroticism. I think the way that Gaga performs it, she forces you to really think about these things. And that's what camp is. Like you're being intentionally bad so that people will have to be like, oh yeah, wait, this is it's like an ironic critique of all these things. I don't know.
That's kind of depressing to think about it. Uh, without sounding too, I guess, overly pretentious, this is something that people like David Foster Wallace tried to get at the heart of, this idea of irony versus sincerity.
Mhm.
Like why you have to be ironic to convey a point about something. If that's really if that's what's really at stake with Gaga's performance, then why is it why does it have to be weird, I guess, or why does it have to be a spectacle when it could just be like a heart to heart?
Will anyone listen to a heart to heart? Will that get anyone's attention?
No, and that's the problem, I guess.
That's why I like her though, because I don't think like the heart to heart being transparent, being sincere, I don't think anyone has an appetite for that anymore. So if this is the most effective way to get the message across, go for it. Like I
Do you
think
think
about
so? Do you really think so?
I do think so. Because I don't know. Like we can move into social media now because I don't know. I
Okay.
see how much the things that people post, they're very moralistic. It's like people are constantly on a soapbox preaching some kind of message as if like they really think that their opinion, what they're saying on their soapbox matters. And on one hand, I just think it's very inauthentic because who are you to get on your soapbox and preach to me? Like you are Like we're all broken people. We're all like none of us embody all the ideals we stand for. So who are
Yeah.
you to speak like you know, like it's just very presumptuous. And that's why, like, if I want to critique what people are doing, if I think people are wrong, I'm not just going to be like, this is all wrong. This is self-indulgent and vapid. Because who am I? Like, who am I to say that? I rather say it in an ironic way that's going to catch you off guard, maybe make you laugh, but then make you think, oh, wait, yeah, I do this. And it's like, I do it too. Like, I do ridiculous,
Yeah.
vapid things too, but I just, I don't know. Like, that's why I think when I look at something like Art Pop, which is this ridiculous album that's like so empty, the fact that it's so over the top and campy, it makes you reflect on the emptiness of the culture in a way that's not, she doesn't come off as preachy. She's like inviting you to enter into this emptiness rather than be like, I'm up here and I'm going to tell you people why you're wrong. You should listen to me.
Mm.
I'm not going to listen to you if you talk to me like that.
It seems rather overconsumptive, though. If I'm trying to say if that makes any sense. Like you have to be over the top to get your point across.
Yeah. And but that's, I think it has moral value when you do that because again, you're not being presumptuous. You're not being like, oh, look at me. I'm so moral. I'm so righteous. And you should listen to me. But also on an aesthetic level, when you put on this over the top performance, like it's entertaining. So in a sense, it's almost charitable to do that because not only are you getting truth across to someone, like you're entertaining them, you're showing them something fascinating in the process.
Yeah. It's a show. It's a. I think it's kind of. I have my own issues with it, but I understand what you're saying, and I'm definitely guilty of doing the very same thing. It's just that does it ever get to a point where you can actually get back down to earth and have a face-to-face conversation and be earnest about your beliefs and how you're feeling and what you wish to
There,
say?
I think there are different stages. There's like the performative stage, the public stage, where I think, yeah, like you can put on this over the top performance. Um, but then when you're having a one-on-one encounter, then yeah, I think that's a real context for being sincere, having the heart to
Mhm.
heart. But I don't know. This is like one of the ideas that Charles Taylor, who I'm really into, talks about. Like he says that there are spaces of structure and spaces of anti-structure. So
Right.
basically, there are spaces where the how can we put it? We're expected to conform to the design of nature. We're expected to, to go along with what's expected of us, but then there are spaces where we can transgress those laws. And we don't pretend like those laws aren't there. We know they are, but like we can't just be rational all the time. Like there has to be
Yeah.
space for us to be ridiculous and outlandish. So I think, yeah, when we're talking about big moral social issues on a public sphere and on a public stage, yeah, like I think totally we can afford to be performative. But when we're talking about real relationships with people who I don't just know on social media, but people I like actually share my life with, then no, I'm not going to put on a show for them. Like I'm going to
No.
listen to them and talk to them for real.
How do you even go about having these conversations on social media without being so convoluted or putting yourself out there as being someone that's so self-obsessed with what they have to say, you know?
Um, mm, I don't know.
It's
I
kind of
mean,
an impasse.
I think it also depends on personality type. Um, I don't know. I've realized more and more that like when I'm posting stuff on social media, I really like I can't stomach when people post these infographics about social issues. And again, it's like they take it so seriously as if my opinion really matters and I'm making a difference. And again,
Right.
I'm like, who are you? Why do you think you posting an infographic is gonna I don't know. I just don't like the idea that we can presume to be these moral exemplars when really, Like, why do you have the right to preach to me and tell me about why your cause is so righteous and I'm not enlightened enough? Like, if you want to challenge me, then like, then entertain me, then draw me in. Like, it's aesthetically kind of vapid when you
I mean,
present,
it's yeah,
you
it's
know.
deadening to the spirit.
But then this brings up the question that we were talking about before. So people who advocate for certain social issues or moral issues, are they just performing an identity? Like, is that really what they're trying to do? Or is there actual moral weight behind what they're doing? I'm going to say no. I think it's purely performative, and their performance is not a good quality one.
Right. I mean, I'm inclined to say that there is at least some kind of semblance of genuine concern, but in the arena of social media, it does not seem any as if anything matters, so to say. Everything's just about social posturing, symbolic capital, and having some kind of, I guess, an audience and telling your story. If that's a lot of it is kind of self-centered and narcissistic, but then there is also that aspect, this whole communal aspect where we're sharing information with one another and we're furthering otherwise unknown causes. It does seem very self-indulgent and self-congratulatory. I get where you're coming from.
Because like when I see a lot of people who will post these infographics, and again, the way they will construe it, it's very puritanical. It's like,
Yeah,
I'm enlightened. I know the truth. I stand for the truth. You people don't. You need to get with the program.
you need
Otherwise,
to
you're
get
not on the
woke.
right side. But also, they'll post that simultaneously with these selfies with, themselves doing very self-indulgent things like getting wasted at a party, whatever. And I'm like, at what point does standing for a moral issue take over my entire lifestyle?
Yeah,
Like if I'm all about furthering the cause of minorities, of those who are impoverished, at what point do I live a level of spiritual poverty? Like I
oh,
can't just fight for social issues while living a spiritually indulgent lifestyle. Like that's a contradiction. Like people who are all about, I don't know, like I see a lot of people who criticize consumer capitalism, but their lifestyles are so consumeristic in terms of, again, like being self-indulgent. So that's why I'm like, performing an identity, and your performance is morally vapid, but also aesthetically it's weak because you're not even acknowledge, like you're not even putting on this elaborate show to entertain us. Like if you're going to put on a show, acknowledge what you're doing and do a good job. Um, but I don't know. That's why I'm just very disillusioned with a lot of what I see.
yeah, I definitely agree with you. I mean, I think a lot of people do neglect to acknowledge that being on social media itself, we are effectively performers. It speaks to this something I previously read about the democratization of cultural power. Now we all have these little audiences to whom we perform, and being on social media and doing all of these things, we are effectively positioning ourselves as both performers on the one hand and as audiences on the other. It's like a kind of, we hold these positions concurrently. So to an extent, it most certainly is performative in the sense of performances being put on. But then also given the weight that the word performative has right now, especially in terms of quote unquote performative activism, when even though personally I think all activism is performative, essentially it's a political performance. It doesn't help that it has this negative connotation to it, and people are trying to be as authentic as possible in the most existential sense of the term, as in I am this and I will sacrifice my well-being for this. But yes,
Yeah.
I do agree with you, and I do concede that it is performative or vaudevillian, if I can go so far as suggesting that.
Yeah. And if we are going to presume to stand for some moral cause, like my whole thing is that, like, morality, like I don't achieve morality by my own efforts because like I'm far from perfect. Like I am very
Right.
selfish. I do self-indulgent things all the time. So like to claim myself as a exemplar of morality. Like I just think it's ridiculous. And I think
Yeah.
if I'm going to speak about a moral issue, like I need to speak about it in a way that recognizes that I'm detached from it, that like this moral ideal comes from something beyond me. I don't live up
Right.
to it. So if I'm going to speak about it, that's why I do think, yes, like I need to speak about it ironically or in a paradoxical way, just out of the humility of saying that, yeah, I believe that this is true, but I know that not only do all these other people not live up to it, I know I myself don't live up to it. So it's
Right.
like to identify myself with the cause, I just think that is not authentic because you're not perfect and you will never be.
Hmm. I think that, yeah, I'm certainly guilty of doing the same. But then over these, as I get older, I guess I'm kind of wary of this kind of hip cynicism that I see among my peers. If you know what I'm talking about, it is this overly self-aware, this overly this sense of like paralyzing self-awareness where you're essentially paralyzed into inaction. And irony, I can see that irony and this whole idea of being self-referential is a black hole. It becomes an end to itself, and you just end up spiraling. And there really are no definitive answers to provide here, But I'm wary as well of the whole the idea of working with these, how can I say, like you like to borrow something you said, these paradoxes, and I don't even think that there will be any answers, but it's just always a worry,
Yeah. And I mean, I want to go more into the topic of aesthetics, but just to add a lot of what I'm saying, like I'm thinking of people like take von Balthasar. So his whole, I guess, like his theological approach to ethics is to say that like you can't have ethics without aesthetics because
Mm,
ultimately ethics is this performance, it's this drama between the human and the transcendent. So
right.
if we don't begin with an understanding of the value of performance, of aesthetics, then our morality is just going to be really empty because then there's no sense of the drama. There's no sense of this tension anymore. It's just I'm moral because I decided, well, that's boring. I don't want to watch that.
There's no beauty to it, is what I'm getting from
Yeah, like if we're going to
you.
talk about morality, we do need to start with beauty. And I do think
Yeah.
performativity is very much connected to beauty aesthetics, you know. But let's talk more about like aesthetics as it has to do with art, because I know you're very into modern art.
Yeah, I I think that it's a very, I guess, really cliched position to take, but I think more that aesthetics is really irrelevant to art, if that makes any sense, any kind of sense.
So then what constitutes art?
I'm I'm inclined to agree with a sort of conceptual art critique of art, and more so to emphasize the concept and idea and context. It's the same thing that has been happening, the certain self-reflexive trend in art since, I would say, Duchamp and Dada and the surrealists, about art is art insofar as it is placed in the art context. I mean, Duchamp went so far as um placing a fountain in the context and calling it art. And 100 years later, we view it as the epitome of um I wouldn't say postmodern, but modernist art. So that's how I would define it. Nothing to do with aesthetics, at least not entirely to do with aesthetics.
Yeah, because I mean, I know a lot of more traditional conservative people who will tear abstract art to shreds and say, like it's nihilistic, there's no beauty. And I'm like,
And
well,
they're right.
yeah, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
Like a lot of it is ugly, but it has value insofar as it's pointing to the ugliness of our culture, the ugliness within humanity, like it sends a powerful message. It provokes thought. So then back to your point about, well, what constitutes art, like it doesn't necessarily have to be beautiful, but um it does, it sends a message. It's and it also has to do with, I guess, like the form and content. I don't know, but you can say more about that because I think you understand that better than me.
I would I think that my view of form and content is very much in keeping with, I guess, the quote unquote deconstructivist ideas that are rampant in like liberal arts campuses, and especially in as this whole um I'm not really sure if you're uh been keeping track, but like NFTs and whatnot, you know,
Mhm.
these new interesting propositions to art that pretty much suggest that form and content are not as do not have a primacy as we once believed, you know, because some of the most quintessential, I guess, ideas around modernist art is that there is significant form, there is a content, there is a kind of I would not exactly say something close to a platonic ideal, but there is something within art that makes it art, and this can only be achieved through aesthetic reflection, and only the
Mhm.
it is in a sense the idea that through aesthetic reflection you can uh, come to understand art. You know, viewing art in art as a transcendent and as a way, as not exactly as a thing in itself, but as something which has a reflective, I guess, a cognitive aspect. And my idea is that there is no such thing. It's very. I hate to say subjective because that's just the most lukewarm thing you could say about artistic reflection, but it is very much a game. Essentially, it
Mhm.
is very much a game. It has to do more so with individual and collective enunciations and beliefs and desires, and more it has almost entirely nothing to do with uh, beauty or some transcendent idea, or like art as a consecrated idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say though, like as much as I don't like when people discount the value of modern art, I also don't like when if we blur the lines and say like it is all relative, because like there was one day a
Yeah.
couple months ago I went to the Met in Manhattan, and I saw the Alice Neal exhibit, which was interesting, but then I just like poked around the medieval, I guess more Baroque kind of section. And I could, and then so like I went there, and then afterwards I went to the MoMA, and it had a noticeably different effect on me. Like I felt that being in the Met inspired certain sentiments in me that I did not feel in the MoMA. Like in the MoMA, it made
Right.
me think, it made me ask a lot of profound questions about our culture, about society, about human nature, but it didn't nourish me in the same
Why do you
way,
think that is?
because I don't think modern art is trying to point to these objective realities that do redeem, that do fulfill the human person. I think it's, again, trying to critique, it's trying to perhaps deconstruct certain aspects of society. But I do think older forms of art are trying to actually offer something that will fulfill the person or point us to this ultimate ideal. Just because modern art doesn't aim to do that, again, I don't think it's fair to say it's useless or bad, but I just, I can't say that it had the same effect. Like there was a noticeable difference, and that
Do you
matters.
think that do you think that it was more so about, well, the content of the painting, or just the kind of do you think it was about the form, like the content of the painting, like what depicted, or was it something deeper than that?
I think it has to do with form
Yeah.
for the most
Well,
part.
art is very, at least the way I understand it, especially after say someone like Warhol, it's very how can I, it's it's a true statement by virtue of by necessity or by virtue of its logical form. You know, it kind of instantaneous. It kind of makes itself true. If that makes any sense, you know, it's a
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm, yeah, so what I can say this though. If I read about more modern artists, if I read their stories, if I read the backgrounds of certain pieces that they did, that will fill my soul in a way that like if I just looked at it without knowing the context, I wouldn't take that away. Like when I
Yeah.
read about Warhol's life and what inspired certain paintings or, you know, silk screens, whatever, then I'm like, oh my God, like this is so beautiful. And this, it responds to some like need I have in my soul. Whereas if I do look at, like, if I look at a Caravaggio and I don't know the whole story behind it, I think inherently it does speak to me without me having to know. Um, and this is why I think some people say modern art is kind of elitist because it's like you have to be enlightened. You have to.
I know it most certainly is. If you think about the types of people that go to art museums or art galleries, just in general, it is very much. I very much would argue. I guess that these kinds of places are. I hate to say this, but they produce types of people. You know, if that makes sense, they're kind of like a consecrated space for artistic reflection, but that artistic reflection is predicated on a certain kind of education and a certain kind of socialization. When I think about the people that, especially moving through art circles around the world, when I think of the people that I've met, there's always this air of that they are, I would not say highly educated, but they received a specific type of they've had the taste passed down onto them. You know, it's very much situated within the social field, I think.
Yeah. And this makes me think about, I was teaching a class once with, it was mostly like kind of urban inner city youth. And like I was showing them different pieces of art and I asked them to rate them. And I remember the one that they hated the most was a Basquiat piece. They were so
Oh
scandal.
man.
And it's like, it's funny because it's like a lot of these kids had a similar background to Basquiat, but they were so scandalized because it's like, this is ugly. And it's like, why would you want to show us something ugly? Like, there's like no consideration for us as the viewer. And the one they
Yeah.
ranked as the best, I think it was between Da Vinci's Last Supper and Botticelli's Primavera or whatever I forget
Mm.
what it's called. But and I like I challenged them to be like, okay, why are you saying these pieces, which you know are kind of foreign from their social context, are more beautiful? And a lot of them said it's because we understand what's happening, like it makes sense. Whereas the Basquiat one, it's like I don't get it. So
I would think, yeah, I would agree with them to that extent. But I think Basquiat is very deceptive as an artist, or is it just a general figure in the art world? Because he his whole image is, I guess he might have contributed to it somehow, but he was very much the son of an accountant or some middle class um type person. He ran away from home to sort of husk it out on the mean streets of New York. You know, his image is very deceptive. That's one thing that I haven't seen people talk about, especially after the whole scandal with Jay-Z and Beyonce, and I think it was Tiffany's had a painting, and this whole intersection of like black capitalism in the art world. No one really mentions that Basquiat was just not some street kid. He was very educated, and also he came from a fairly affluent background. But then, in order to, I guess, he did exactly what you were suggesting earlier. You know, he made a spectacle of himself. He performed something, and it also helped that his art was, I guess, good. But essentially, he performed being this rough down and out kid who made these amazing paintings. So I would very much align Basquiat within this tradition of middle class artists that put on a performance of poverty, you know, and this grungy aura about them, because that's what you said earlier about something visceral about the urban environment. You know, he very much adopted that, and he took it to its logical conclusion, I guess. He burnt himself out, and yeah,
Mm,
sad to say, but he was not. He was very much within. He very much grew up in the same framework that he wished to critique, and it ate him up and chewed him out, spat him out. I mean,
mm.
yeah.
So let's close with this. Ooh, considering how chaotic, frenetic postmodern culture is, where can we find where do you find authentic beauty? As however you would define it.
Uh, I I would say that I'm still caught up in just the critique part. I would say that I'm as I am right now, I'm very much still stuck in the whole loop of self-awareness, and that nothing is beautiful yet everything is simultaneously beautiful. It's kind of a it's an impasse. And I would say it is in part due to this um boomer thing. There's something about the creative and social and technological apparatuses being controlled by like the most regressive and the regressive types of shit that we see nowadays. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's just a word salad. Essentially, is what I'm doing. I'm trying to intellectualize. There is no emotion present. It's just pure intellectual abstraction, and I am still stuck in that. There is no way out. It's very fatalistic, and unfortunately, I perpetrate it in my attempts to escape it because I've been trying to see what I'm doing. Just word salad, pretty much that. Just intellectual abstraction. There's no substance at all.
I think the fact of being stuck in this tension and recognizing it, that itself is substantial, I would dare to say.
What
You know,
happens when you can't escape it?
you I think you affirm it and you communicate it. I mean that's because otherwise what? We either wallow in it, we ignore it, we blind ourselves. But like to say, yes, this is where I am, this is
Yeah.
what I'm experiencing, and then you communicate it. Like I think that is itself an extremely substantial place to be in.
But what about
Um,
you? Where do you find it?
um, where do I find it?
Yeah, true beauty.
True beauty. I would say like I need to see that all these intuitions about like when I see something like, you know, whether it's a music video by Madonna or Gaga or the song itself, like when I see something that kind of provokes, not just provokes thought, but provokes me on the level of like the soul, like on this deeper ontological level.
Right.
I want to see that I can share that experience of being provoked with other people, and that like when someone can affirm this, when someone can be like, yes, like I affirm this to be true, I recognize this, like that connection, that encounter sparks something even bigger because it's now it's a shared intuition, and it's
Yeah.
like it's the opening of, I think, some greater discovery. So I think it comes down to like I don't want to discover these things in isolation. I want to share them with people so that it can be open me up to the possibility of seeing more, even if I don't
Right.
know what that more is, even if I don't know if it exists. Like the fact that now there's this link, there's a possibility now, I think. At least that's what I
Yeah.
see. Yeah.
Which is like communal escape, I guess. You're sort of relying on a community through which you can express yourself and have that community expressed or running through you, I guess.
Yeah, but it's like I do experience it not only as an escape, but as like as the opening of something that I did not
Okay.
foresee. Like I just see that something new comes into play when now it is shared with someone else. And there's the possibility of more than what I calculate to be possible.
God,
So
that's beautiful.
it is. When it happens, it is. And this is why
Yeah.
I'm not like, this is why I'm not in despair. Like, yes, I'm frustrated. I rip my hair out some days, but I'm not in despair right now.
Well, the worst thing you could do is succumb to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So that's why I think, yes, let's talk about it. Like, let's, yeah, let's generate these conversations and not just,
it's important.
yeah. So, anyway, what do you want to plug before we finish up?
Uh,
We mentioned your
I guess.
Instagram.
Oh yeah. And probably I'm working on a couple of things. Working on a newsletter,
Okay.
a Substack. Naturally, same kind of intellectual, meaningless pursuit on Substack, writing nonsensical articles. And I'm working on a magazine. I'm revamping. I had an online zine a couple years ago, and I'm kind of revamping that. And I'm looking for, I guess, writers and people to work with. And I think, yeah, that's about it. Can I plug my friend's podcast or something?
Of course, sure.
Yeah, check out. Hold on, let me put it out. Drug Called Gang. I was recently on that one with Dank Deleuze. And
You follow them, yeah.
sorry, I think you follow him, Tony.
Yes.
Yeah, and also Benzo Rehab Dungeon. Those are um, two, I guess, acquaintances. But I really fuck with their stuff. And also, thank you for having me on.
This was a lot of fun. I enjoyed
Yeah,
it.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Cool. So thank you for joining us, and we thank everyone for listening, and we hope you've
Yeah.
been sufficiently scandalized.